The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the streets of Tondo, Manila's most notorious slum, where garbage lined the narrow alleys and the air hung thick with humidity and desperation. 12-year-old Miguel Santos wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a smudge of dirt across his brown skin. His worn-out shirt, 3 sizes too big, hung off his thin frame like a flag on a windless day. His shorts were patched in so many places that it was hard to tell what the original fabric had looked like. But his eyes, dark and bright, held something that poverty couldn't touch, a spark of hope that refused to die. Miguel had been wandering the streets of Manila for the past 3 years, ever since his mother died from an illness they couldn't afford to treat. His father had disappeared long before that, leaving nothing but faded memories and empty promises. The boy survived by doing odd jobs, running errands for shopkeepers, and sometimes going days without a proper meal. But every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, Miguel would stand outside the Grand Solaire Resort and Casino, pressing his face against the glass doors, watching the wealthy tourists and locals pass through the marble halls. He wasn't looking at the glittering chandeliers or the expensive restaurants. His eyes were fixed on something else entirely, the magnificent grand piano that sat in the center of the lobby, gleaming under the crystal lights like a treasure from another world. Music had been Miguel's first language. His mother, before sickness stole her voice and strength, had been a singer in a small church. She had taught him to hear the world differently, to find melodies in the rain, rhythms in footsteps, harmonies in the chaos of city life. Though they never owned an instrument, she would hum and sing, and Miguel would tap out accompaniments on whatever surface he could find, cardboard boxes, tin cans, the wooden table in their tiny room. She told him that music was the language of the soul, and that it could open doors that money never could. He held onto those words like a lifeline. On this particular afternoon, Miguel stood at his usual spot outside the casino when a commotion near the entrance caught his attention. A sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the curb, and a woman emerged who looked like she had stepped out of a fashion magazine. Catherine Villanueva was 42 years old but looked a decade younger, thanks to regular trips to Singapore for treatments that cost more than most Filipino families earned in a year. Her honey blonde highlights caught the sunlight, and her designer dress, a crimson creation that probably cost more than a year's rent in Tondo, swished around her legs as she walked. Diamonds sparkled at her throat, wrists, and fingers. She moved with the confidence of someone who had never been told no, who had never wanted for anything, who had never known what it meant to be hungry or afraid or invisible. Catherine was the wife of Ramon Villanueva, one of Manila's wealthiest developers, a man whose construction empire had reshaped the city's skyline. They had everything: penthouses, vacation homes, luxury cars, exclusive club memberships. Everything except the one thing Catherine wanted most. They had no children. After years of failed attempts and medical procedures, they had begun discussing adoption. But Catherine had very specific requirements. She wanted a child who would fit into their world, someone cultured, educated, refined. Someone who wouldn't embarrass them at the country club. As Catherine walked toward the casino in trance, her personal assistant trailing behind her, she noticed the small crowd gathering near the lobby. Someone had opened the grand piano, and a middle-aged tourist was attempting to play, producing a clumsy rendition of a popular song. Catherine wrinkled her nose in distaste. She was an accomplished pianist herself, having studied at a prestigious conservatory in Europe during her youth. Music was one of her few genuine passions, though she rarely shared it with anyone outside her elite social circle. Miguel watched from the doorway as the security guards, who usually shooed him away, were distracted by the impromptu performance. He took a small step inside, then another. His bare feet made no sound on the polished marble floor. He had dreamed of this moment countless times, imagined what it would feel like to touch those ivory keys, to coax music from such a magnificent instrument. His heart pounded so loudly he was sure everyone could hear it. Catherine noticed the boy immediately. How could she not? He stood out among the well-dressed crowd like a stain on silk. His dirty clothes, his uncombed hair, his bare feet, everything about him offended her sense of order and propriety. She felt a flash of irritation. Why was security allowing street children inside? This was supposed to be an exclusive establishment. The tourist finished his clumsy performance to polite applause and stepped away from the piano. Miguel, as if pulled by an invisible string, moved closer. His hand reached out, trembling, toward the keys. Stop right there, Catherine's voice cut through the air like a knife. She strode toward Miguel, her heels clicking sharply against the marble. What do you think you're doing, boy? Miguel froze, his hands suspended inches from the piano. He looked up at the beautiful, angry woman towering over him. I'm sorry, ma'am. I just wanted to. You just wanted to touch an instrument worth more than you could imagine with your filthy hands. Catherine interrupted, her voice dripping with disdain. This isn't a playground for street children. Security. A small crowd had gathered, some looking uncomfortable, others nodding in agreement with Catherine's assessment. Two security guards hurried over, reaching for Miguel's arms. Wait, Miguel said, his voice small but steady. Please, ma'am. I know how to play. I can. Catherine laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that made several people wince. You. Play this piano. Don't be ridiculous. This is a Steinway & Sons Model D concert grand piano. It requires years of training, discipline, education. Things you wouldn't understand. The word stung, but Miguel had grown a thick skin from 3 years on the streets. He stood his ground. My mother taught me music, ma'am. She said it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, music speaks the same language. Something flickered across Catherine's face, too quick to identify. Then her expression hardened again. How touching. And where is this musical mother of yours now? She died, ma'am. 3 years ago. An uncomfortable silence fell over the crowd. Catherine felt the eyes on her, judging her harshness toward an orphan. She didn't like being made to feel guilty, especially not by a street child. An idea formed in her mind, born from pride and spite in equal measure. I'll tell you what, Catherine said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. If you can play this piano, really play it, not just bang on the keys like a monkey, I'll adopt you. I'll take you into my home, give you everything you could ever want. But when you fail, you leave and never come back to bother decent people again. Do we have an agreement? Miguel's eyes widened. The crowd murmured. Catherine's assistant looked horrified. Ma'am, perhaps we should. Be quiet, Linda, Catherine snapped. She looked back at Miguel with a smug smile. Well, are you going to accept my generous offer or run away like I expected? Miguel looked at the piano, then at the woman, then back at the piano. He thought of his mother, of all the times she had told him that music was magic, that it could change everything. He had nothing to lose. He had already lost everything that mattered. Yes, ma'am. I accept. Catherine gestured grandly toward the piano bench. Then by all means, entertain us. Miguel walked to the piano on shaking legs. The bench was too high for him, so he stood, his small frame dwarfed by the massive instrument. He looked down at the keys, pristine and perfect, and for a moment, doubt flooded through him. He had never touched a real piano before. What if his mother had been wrong? What if poverty had stolen even this from him? Then he closed his eyes and remembered. He remembered his mother's voice, pure and clear. He remembered the melodies she had sung while cooking their meager meals, the lullabies she had hummed when he couldn't sleep because his stomach was empty. He remembered her hands, rough from work but gentle when they touched his face, telling him that he carried music in his soul. Miguel placed his hands on the keys, and something extraordinary happened. The moment his fingers made contact with the cool ivory, it was as if a circuit completed. Everything his mother had taught him, every rhythm he had tapped out on tin cans and cardboard, every melody that had lived only in his imagination, suddenly had a voice. He began to play. The lobby fell absolutely silent. Miguel's fingers moved across the keys with a grace that seemed impossible for someone who had never played a real piano before. He started with a simple folk melody, a song his mother used to sing, but he transformed it into something transcendent. His natural talent, honed by 3 years of survival and sharpened by grief, poured out through the music. He played with a raw emotion that no conservatory could teach, with a depth of feeling that came from knowing real loss and real hope in equal